Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Josh, and it's been a while since we've done a little office chat, but I wanted to do one today because I have been getting a ton of emails from you all over the past week or so about a number of issues that Toyota is having. But one in particular, I've gotten like probably upwards of 15 or even more emails about, and that is the head gasket issues with the UR series V8 engines that AMD, the car care nut, has been seeing in his shop, and that he made a video on like about a week ago from the time I'm filming this. And today, because I've gotten so many emails from you all, I thought rather than writing, back the same thing individually to each one of you, I would just come on and address it here today. And this is actually, it gives me this is a good opportunity to talk about something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while, which is, whenever, whether it's him or anyone else, like whenever issues with cars come up, there's always a big uproar on forums and stuff like that, and people get, people kind of blow things out of proportion. I'm not saying that he did with this one or anything like that, but in general, whenever things happen, people get up, kind of up in arms. And I want to talk about how I approach, these kind of things when they arise, and how I think, I think everyone should as well. Now, before we get into this, let me be very clear kind of disclaimer over top before we get into this. I don't know AMD. I'm not in the little Toyota Boys Club that exists here on YouTube, and that's not me throwing shade at them or anything. I'm just some random guy here on YouTube who's got like, a few thousand people that watch my videos on a regular basis, and I do this as a hobby. This is not my job or anything like that. So don't please understand. This video is not meant to diminish anyone else out there. It is not meant to disrespect anyone else out there. It's not meant to question anyone else out there. The only reason I'm doing this is because I've gotten so many questions from you all, and you wanted to know kind of how I approach this. So anyway, let's talk about kind of how I approach issues when they arise with cars and get reported on, on the internet and on YouTube. Like any form of media, there are people who will go out there and make sensationalist claims that get people into an uproar. And I'm not saying that these claims are false by any means. I'm not saying that what people are reporting is not actually happening and is not true. But, it's kind of like the way that politics are here in the US, which, if our political system went away tomorrow, I would be the happiest person on earth. But that to say, go look at either side of the political arena, okay? And you'll come away thinking that the world is ending no matter who you talk to. But depending on which side you talk to, you'll think the reason is ending for entirely different reasons. The left side, they're in an uproar about something. On the right side, they're in an uproar about something. And on both sides, they blow shit way out of proportion. And people start to take, isolated incidents as fact about an entire population of people or cars or whatever. There isn't a sense of scale when these problems start to occur, and that's what I want to talk about today. Now, I rarely talk about my job, like my day job, my professional job, here on this channel, because I like to keep my private life private. But one thing I will tell you about what I do for work is my job is all about data sciences, and a big part of my job at work is making sure that the company I work for is making sound, safe decisions based on data at scale. That's why I make the money I do. Because if I make a mistake, my company could very well spend $50 million on something that isn't going to give us any kind of return and isn't going to solve a problem and that kind of thing. And so whenever because of that background, whenever I see one of these problems and this kind of stuff arising on the internet, on car forums and such, the first thing I look at before I even, make a judgment call one way or another is I try to get as much data around the problem at scale as I can. Same thing I do at work, I do in my personal life. And a lot of times when the person who's bringing it up, they're not providing any kind of empirical data for us to really understand the scope and scale of the problem and the impact, the true impact in a global sense of the problem. Is it impacting 1% of the population, or is it impacting 50% of a population? And then on top of that, and again, this is my job at work, when problems occur, we also have to understand all the context around what operating conditions led to this problem happening, or, this failure point happening. And so I want to, in this case, with this UR Series V8 issue, I want to provide you guys and kind of ground us here with some of the actual empirical data that I was able to collect about, the cars that have these engines, and kind of putting some stats around, looking at probabilities here. So on your screen, I'm going to put up some numbers for you, and these come directly from Toyota via Good Car Bad Car, and I love Good Car Bad Car because they're one of the best sources for automotive sales data out there. So these are the sales numbers of 4 UR V8 based vehicles that were sold here in the US. GX460 sales between 2010 and 2024, they sold about 345,608 units. Land Cruiser 200 sales between 2008 and 2021 was 41,834 units sold. Its cousin, or its twin vehicle, the LX570, sold 88,340 units. And then Sequoia, as well, between 2008 and 2021, sold 187,052 units. And just between those 4 vehicles, and I'm not including Tundra because Tundra actually had it in the last generation. There was a period where it actually did offer the UZ Series V8, but just those 4 vehicles that you see here on screen sold a total of 662,834 trucks were sold with some kind of UR Series V8, whether 1UR FE or the 3UR that was in Land Cruiser and Sequoia. So 662,834 cars, that's a lot. That's a really big sample size of cars that are out there on the roads with a UR Series V8. That's over 500,000 of these trucks sold, okay, with this engine. Now, here's the problem with this head gasket issue is we don't have numbers on how many of these have failed. So we can't necessarily pin down what the failure rate was, what percentage of that population has suffered a catastrophic head gasket failure. But because we do have the total number, we can at least talk hypothetical, failure rate, and we can look at what the impact on the general population is, if it's 1% or 5%, because that number is going to give you the scale of the problem and also how likely you are to experience that problem. And so relative to the total number of trucks sold with a UR Series V8 in the US, a failure rate of 1% would be 6,628 vehicles would have to fail just to hit 1% of all of these trucks sold. Have we gotten there yet? I don't know. It's possible that we have, but again, we don't have the numbers. And even if we have gotten to only 1% of these vehicles failing, that's a pretty low failure rate, all things considered. Okay, so now let's talk about how much it would take to get to a failure rate of 5%. 5% of this entire population of UR Series V8 based vehicles would require 33,141 vehicles to suffer a catastrophic head gasket failure. Now, just thinking about that number, 33,141, okay? People would be burning, rioting in the street if 33,141 of these vehicles, failed due to a catastrophic head gasket failure. Because it sounds like an enormous number, and it is an enormous number. But even that is only 5% of the entire the entire population of these vehicles that is out on the road today. And for context, before we get off the topic of failure rate, let's talk about another engine failure problem that Toyota has had, which is, of course, the failure of the V35A twin turbo V6. So, and now let me put some numbers up on your screen about this. Now, granted, not all recalled Toyota Tundra and LX600s have suffered catastrophic engine failure due to this problem, but Toyota says the potential number of vehicles that could fail due to this issue is 102,092 vehicles, relative to the 229,989 total vehicles sold, okay? So that's all LX600s and all Tundras sold between model years 2023 and 2024. That would be a failure rate of 44.3%. That is a much more significant number than, like saying 1% of all UR V8s failed or even 5% of all UR V8s failed. Can we see why the recall was issued on the V35A? Because this is clearly a big issue, right? A big percentage of your population could suffer catastrophic engine failure versus, again, we don't have the final number for the UR Series V8, but assuming it's between 1 and 5%, much lower, a much smaller problem, all things considered. So this all to say, before we start worrying unnecessarily and selling your GX460 and stuff, just, take it as it comes, right? My hope is that AMD and all these other Toyota boys will go out, get the data for us, since they have the connections to Toyota, get the data for us about what the actual failure rate of these UR Series V8s is. If we were to come upon that 44%, of UR Series V8s are failing due to a failed head gasket, then that's another story, and Toyota should really issue a recall or a TSB on these vehicles, where if they do fail, Toyota will repair or replace the engine at no cost to the owner. And that's why that's happening with the V35A engine, because they do have such a huge, a very high failure rate. The next thing I want to talk about with this UR Series V8 engine issue is kind of what I mentioned, the second part of what I mentioned at the beginning of the video, which is operating conditions. And this is another thing I have to look at work. Before I can go screaming to, the boardroom in Manhattan about something going wrong, I don't actually go into the boardroom in Manhattan, I'm just saying. I also have to understand kind of how did this problem occur? What were the conditions that allowed a failure point to happen? And that's more data that we're kind of missing that's missing in a lot of problems that people talk about on the internet, but also I want more data on these failures here. So AMD mentioned in the video, the Land Cruiser that we saw in the video had over 200,000 miles on it. And yes, Land Cruisers are, like he said in the video, known to run to like 500,000 miles. But getting to 200,000 miles on any new car is a pretty great achievement in itself. And given that, the data that I'm looking for here is I want to know how that Land Cruiser was maintained from day one, okay? And the reason that this is important is, I'll tell you guys, I look at Land Cruiser 200 listings, used Land Cruiser 200 listings all the time, because in my mind, I'm like, if the right one came along and, it had a perfect service history and it was low mileage, I might consider buying one. Because I'd love to have one. But so many of these Land Cruiser 200s I see out there were taken to quick lube places, have gaps in the service history, have, questionable services performed or questionable things that they saw arising. A lot of people, will also go and mess with the car itself. They'll change the suspension, they'll lift it, they'll put giant tires on it. The GX that was in his shop that he said also had a catastrophic head gasket failure, it was on the lift in the back of his shop if you watched that video. That one had giant tires on it, looked like it had a lift, looked like it had been chopped up a little bit. And all those things can impact the longevity of a car. And this is not even to mention the fact that, I don't know whether that Land Cruiser or the GX that he had in the shop or the other cars that he's seen these failures on, were they owned, from new? Because the current owner may baby that car and may do perfect maintenance. But this is why I always say to you guys, whenever I get asked the question about should I buy a used, any kind of car, Land Cruiser 200 or a used Camry or a used RX, you have to look at the maintenance history on that car, because a used car is only as reliable and as solid as the maintenance that was put into that car and given to that car, and the TLC washing it regularly, cleaning the inside, just all the things that you would do to your car, you hope the previous owner had done. And if they failed to do any of that, right, then that car now has a question mark on it for me. And I look at vehicle health the same way I look at human health, because cars are very much like people in many ways. If you smoke, or if you drink, or if you regularly eat at McDonald's every week, or you're not living your healthiest life, you are ultimately, doing yourself a disservice in the long run. And listen, hear me out loud and clear. I like to eat junk food. I don't smoke and I don't drink, but, I love good food, and I don't eat the healthiest I can. And when we're on vacation, I indulge in certain things. But I understand that long term, I'm not going to be as healthy as someone who goes running every day and only drinks water and, only eats organic foods and is vegan and all this kind of thing, right? The same goes for cars. I hear from a lot of you guys out there, I want a GX460, but I'm going to run regular gas. I want a GX460 or any luxury car out there. but I want to run it on a tight budget. And I don't. This is where, and these are the same people that will then complain later on that my car died or my engine is failing or whatever. Because I ran it on a tight budget, I took it to the quick lube place. I did oil changes every 20,000 miles or whatever. If you're not going to maintain your car, don't buy a luxury car, okay? Like AMD says in the video, V8s are great. They are beautiful to drive. They are wonderful to run. I love my V8 with all my heart. But you better be able to afford to maintain that car properly. Don't buy the car if you can't afford the gas. Don't buy the car if you can't afford the maintenance. And I'm not trying to be a dick about that because I can afford to do these things. I'm just saying that if you care about longevity but you don't want to run premium fuel, go buy a 4Runner. Like, don't buy a GX460 or anything with a V8 if you're not really willing to take care of it, because you do need to take care of these things to make them last. So, yeah, those are my thoughts. And I'm going to say exactly what I say this all day long at work. So it's funny to me that I'm saying this now in a YouTube video, but people come to me with this kind of stuff at work all the time. And once I have the data and it turns out to be a small scale problem, the thing that people always hear from me at work is, I'll keep it on my radar and we'll circle back if it becomes a bigger problem. And that is exactly what I'm going to do with this issue here. I am not discounting that these are very real problems and that they are happening to people out there. And if you are one of those who has had this issue, like, my heart goes out to you. I hope that Land Cruiser owner, I feel really bad for him the same way AMD does. I hope he gets some kind of resolution. And I hope that it doesn't start happening to more of us. But until we know for sure, and until we have all the empirical statistical data and the operating conditions that led to these problems happening in the first place, I'm not going to worry about it for my car because I know how I maintain and own my car. So yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. I hope that this answered the questions that you all had. And listen, you do not have to agree with my opinions ever, okay? Like, if you want to, just kind of maintain your ignorance and say, well, it happened to that car, so it's going to happen to every car. That's, the end of that. You are entitled to believe whatever the hell you want. You do not have to subscribe to my channel. You do not have to watch my videos. You don't have to share my opinions at all. I'm just some random guy here on YouTube sharing my opinions, sharing my thought process, and that's all there is to it. So thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think down in the comments, or as always, email me. Like 15 or so of you have about this issue. Email me at the email you see here on screen. I really appreciate it. I really love hearing from you guys and having this discourse on my channel. And I appreciate that most of my viewers, are not so up their own behinds that they don't entertain other viewpoints. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Have a great one and take care.